So, welcome to another episode of Life Emotion Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about trauma, how it has affected us, how it has shaped us, and how it has helped us to become who we are. So, who would like to start? I think the first question we're going to start with is, what is trauma? How would you define trauma?
Well, the Google definition says it is distressing or disturbing experiences. So that's the
Mm-hmm.
Google. That's the Google definition. Um, yeah, but I think trauma is just one of those things, like I was telling you guys earlier. There's a quote that says, everybody that you meet is traumatized. Everyone has experienced trauma in some way, shape, or form. That's why it's important to be kind because every single person on this planet has been traumatized in one way or the other.
Yes.
And I think sometimes we define trauma as the big things, like you were in the military and you were killing people, you saw war. But it goes far. It could be something as maybe you walked in on your parents doing the do. No, I've heard a lot of people talk about this and they sound traumatized, honey. Or, yeah, or you saw something that shouldn't have quite seen. Or,
Mm,
yeah, it comes in all shapes or form and all shapes and forms. So it's not necessarily the big things. I was in a car crash. That's very traumatizing. But
mhm,
it could also be the little things of maybe some very unkind experience, bullying, people that are
mm,
bullied in school can
mm,
be so traumatizing and it can have such a huge impact on your life.
mhm,
So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think when we think of trauma, we need to think of a wider variety. It's not always oh my God, you know, the obvious ones. It could be in the little things too.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's my take on what trauma is.
It's such a touchy subject. But no, I was going to say, even with what you just talked about, I think too, like it's important that we don't rush people through their process. I think sometimes, like when people go through certain things, if we don't consider it to be a big thing, like you would have described, if we don't consider it to be something that they should be having such a strong emotional reaction to, it's very tempting to say, well, you should be over this. You should get over this. Just get over it. Just get over it. But everybody can't just get over something. And a lot
mm,
of times, the people who are like, just get over it, probably haven't taken the time to pause themselves and try to sort through their own traumatic experiences. Because, like you said, everybody has been traumatized in some way.
mm,
It just like, how do you deal with that trauma? Do you stuff it down and never address it? Or do you take a look at it and go, okay, this situation really bothered me, hurt me, really triggered me. How do I move from here? Do you ask questions of that event or of that situation? So yeah,
mhm,
I just think it's important. We can't rush people through their process.
mm,
Everybody has to heal, and everybody heals differently and in their own time. And I'm not talking about the people who repeatedly go back to certain things, or repeatedly, or who aren't trying to change, right? Who aren't trying to heal, who aren't trying to deal with the trauma. Um, but those people who are really, really actively trying to deal with their trauma, it's important that we give them the time and the space to deal with it in the way they think is best.
mhm.
Yeah.
And I was going to say also, trauma is very subjective, right? So what can be traumatic to one person is not necessarily traumatic
Mm-hmm.
to person. And sometimes also tends to be like a judgy attitude towards, like, why are you not just handling this thing like so and so handle this trauma? But trauma affects people differently, right? And also I think also it depends at which stage that you've experienced the trauma. So like a child experiencing
Mm-hmm.
trauma is different from an adult, you know.
Do you remember
Yeah.
The study from Lorenz when you did psychology, where the imprinting study, where he
Mm,
imprinted on chicks,
mm,
and how there's vital years in your life, and those years, whatever happens, it sticks.
Mm-hmm.
He was able to
Yeah.
get baby chicks. He's human. They
mm.
imprinted on him, and he became their male caregiver, like
Yeah.
role caregiver parent, basically.
Mm,
And
Mm-hmm.
it just highlights that study. There's been so many psychological studies around that, and it just highlights how certain ages or certain points in your life, some of the damage that can be done cannot be reversed.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
And there's
Absolutely.
Yeah.
many things to prove that. And like how Charlotte is saying, trauma is not a one shoe fits all sizes sort of thing. We all have our
Mm-hmm.
sizes. We all have what traumatizes us and
Mm-hmm.
things like that. What I was also going to add is there's a lot of people who have certain things that they're traumatized about, but they don't even know. A lot of people have certain traumas that they
Mm-hmm.
don't know. It gets triggered or brought up at some point. And have you noticed? I don't know if you guys have noticed, but we block a lot of memory out of
Mm-hmm.
things out of our head. You could have gone through something very traumatic to you and you will not remember. Then one day, suddenly, the memory pops up and you're like, where has this memory been my whole life?
Mm-hmm.
That's another sort of
Mm-hmm.
it's a trauma response of
Mm-hmm.
blocking memory out. So
Mm-hmm.
everyone handles trauma differently. You could even be walking with something that really traumatized you and you don't
Mm-hmm.
even know or you don't even remember. Then something will suddenly
Yeah.
happen and it's triggered and you're like, whoa, I didn't even know that was there. So it
Mm-hmm.
could also
Yeah.
be an ongoing process. It's not always something that's at the back of your mind. Or sometimes it's there, it's showing signs to the people around you. You
Mm-hmm.
don't even know that you might be
Yeah.
carrying that. So,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember one time I was sitting down listening to this instrumental. I don't know if y'all know the song "It Is Well" by Bethel Church, right? So I was
Mm-hmm.
sitting down just listening to the instrumental in the background, and it was kind of a like one of those 1 hour loops on YouTube. So it was just playing and playing and playing, and literally I had it kind of on like background noise because it just came on after a song that I was listening to on YouTube. So it came on and it's playing, and I'm not even really paying attention to the song. But all of a sudden I start crying, and I'm like, it's amazing how you could be carrying things and certain things in your environment could be affecting you, but you don't even realize that it's affecting you because you're just going.
Mm-hmm.
You're just going, you're just going. You still have to go to work. You still have certain responsibilities. So you're just going, just going, just going, and not taking the time to pause and really, really try to think about, okay, there's a lot going on in my world at the moment. How is this affecting me? And
Mm-hmm.
how should I respond to these things that are going on in my life? You don't and I think too, like that's why it's so important to be intentional with taking those pauses to care for your heart. Like take care of the heart, take care of the heart, because so much, like the Bible says, the issues of life flow from it, and it's the truth. And yeah, I just think like we just have to take more moments to tend to our heart, to tend to the matters of our heart and what's going on. But yeah, I was like, yeah, I need this
Oh.
and
some stuff I need to look at.
you can be triggered by different things. That's another huge part of trauma.
Mm,
Something like
Mhm.
food can suddenly take you back somewhere. So
mm,
that's how the memory works. It works with things around you, the environmental triggers. It could be food, it could be sound, it
mm,
could be
Yeah.
a word that someone says that suddenly you're just like, whoa,
mm,
you're seeing red. So, and it's also very good to be kind to yourself in those times. Sometimes when you're reacting a certain way to something, people just don't get it. Like
mm,
I was telling you guys last time, my boundary is don't show up at my door. I've been
mm,
stalked.
Mhm.
Don't show up at my door. You're giving me bad memories.
mhm,
So
Mhm.
don't show up. Don't show up at my door. Ask me first. Don't just show up. And that's a trigger for me because I've been
Mhm.
stalked. So
mm,
I take it very seriously. I don't care how much I love you. I will see red. you
mm,
know? So it's also good to be aware of those things and things that trigger you.
mm,
Mhm.
And it
mm,
could be so be kind to yourself too. There's sometimes when people react the same way, it's like, oh my gosh. Yeah, it means a lot to them. So let them
Yeah.
express themselves, you know?
yeah.
So be
Mm,
kind to
Mhm.
yourself and be willing to express yourself however it is you need to. It's you that you're carrying the load. It's not the next person.
mm.
Yeah.
As talking, I thought about the journaling thing as well, right? So sometimes when you go through things, you can actually go back to the pages and see, have I actually dealt with this thing? Because I think,
Yeah.
yeah, I was listening to, I think it was TD Jakes who said, like, focus on when you go through trauma, focus on surviving the trauma, because sometimes you might want to
Mm-hmm.
look for reasons, why is this happening to me? And so that is tough to deal with. Trying to survive is actually the best thing to do, because at the end of the day, it's like some things you figure them out when you're out of that situation. And also, like,
Mm-hmm.
your triggers, it's good to learn your triggers. And also think about what you would also say to people, like, okay, please don't say this thing because this reminds me of ABCD. I remember when I used
Yeah.
to part of the Princess Trust, there's a girl who she just didn't want anyone just stood behind her. Like if she just stand behind her, that would trigger like a memory. And I think she was stalked as well, and she has a fear of anybody just standing behind her. So you could be doing something else, maybe doing a cup of coffee, but if you're behind her, that kind of triggers a traumatic memory for her.
I
Um,
hate that as well. It's a trigger for me as well. Don't stand behind me. Don't creep in on me. You know, people that just want to go boo.
mm,
You want me
Mm-hmm.
to die? My heart is gonna jump out my chest. Now that
mm,
you've killed me, are you happy?
mm, mm.
That's my take on that.
Yeah, so trauma, it's
Mm-hmm.
funny. You guys were saying, when Nisha, you were introducing the episode, and you were talking about, like, we'll talk about our traumas. I'm thinking, what did I go through when I was a kid? I was bullied, like, a lot, and I don't know why my brain would actually forget something like that, because it went on for the longest time, and it was
Mm-hmm.
unpleasant. It was the worst years of my life when I was in boarding school. Every day I would be bullied. Like, how can I forget? So you're right. The brain has a way of just forgetting
Blocking.
those painful experiences,
Yeah.
because it triggers the pain pathways. When you remember those things, it's not pleasant. It's painful. So yeah.
Yeah, and the brain tries to protect you in that way. I remember there was this counseling center here that I interned with at my last year of university when I was doing my bachelor's degree. And there was this lady who came in. So what I was responsible for there was just doing the intake interviews and then either assigning them to the psychologist or the psychiatrist on site. It was a very small counseling center. And there was a lady who came in whose husband had passed, but she could not remember it. And he had just passed that morning, and she could not remember it at all. And she came in, she's like, I don't, she's like, I have to go home to make my husband some dinner. I have to go home. I have to leave. I have to go home. She couldn't remember it. And I think in that moment it hit me like the way the brain tries to protect us from pain, especially when
Mm,
that pain is really hard, difficult pain to deal with. And so, yeah, like sometimes there are things that we go through that we don't remember because the brain is like, if you remember this, it will
It's too
probably break
much.
you. Yeah,
The
it'll be too
defense.
much for you.
So there's defense
Yeah,
mechanisms that people do. There's ways that you respond to trauma, and there's ways that your body creates its defense mechanisms and goes like, okay, this is
yeah.
the only way I can protect myself. And I
mm-hmm,
think back to what Kit was saying. I've been through therapy, years and years of therapy, on and off. So
Hmm.
the journaling thing you suggested, they will even suggest it to you in therapy.
mm,
I've had many therapists suggest journaling. Like I
oh,
told you guys last time, I've journaled throughout my life
mm,
since I could remember. I've
mm,
journaled. I've always
mm,
had a journal of some sort. But as I've gotten older, I've gotten more intentional about it. I have post traumatic stress syndrome.
mm,
So I went through many years of not even knowing that I used to have night terrors.
Wow.
Because when I became an adult, it used to happen when I was younger, but when I became an adult, I didn't know that I was still having them. And you get older and you have sleepovers and things. Then it came to the light and I was just like, whoa, I didn't even realize I still had this. So it's very hard to share a room with me. It was, well, at the moment it's under control, but it's very hard to share a room with me. And the thing is, I'd never remember that I've had those terrors in the night. So wake up
Mm,
screaming, like, I'm in a dreamlike state. You could be talking to me and I don't know, my heart is racing. So it takes time for you to sort of try and get me to calm down. Then I can go back to bed. It's something I've had for years. And I'm 25 and I didn't know. So it was just before I turned, no, I think when I turned 25 is when I had to go back to therapy to address this again. And this was all because I wouldn't have never known ever if
Mm.
my boyfriend at the time wasn't here with me to call it to light and say, oh, you get these bad terrors. Like I can't breathe. I'm gasping for air. And so I thought it was something that was under control. So I had to go back to therapy to even help. And I carried it. Listen, I'm 25. I sleep every night. Okay. And I completely don't know I had that. So
Mm.
it took going
Mm.
back to therapy to address it because I was first diagnosed when I was about 16. But you know, it
Mhm.
comes and goes. So at that time, I used to share a room with my sister. So obviously, I get these nightmares. Went to therapy for that, and I thought it was just a bad dream. It's gone. Who knows? That from that 16 to 25, I'm still carrying these night terrors, and I don't know. Then you wake up and you feel so tired
Mm.
inside. Why am I so tired? I've been up gasping for air, screaming my head off, and I don't even know it.
Mm.
So sometimes you could be carrying things. It could even be there in broad daylight, and I'm like, I didn't know I do that.
Mm.
So it took going
Yeah.
back to therapy and a lot of journaling and trying to work through the things that come up for me.
Mm.
I'm gonna dive in straight. I've said this big thing. I have to at least give some background to it. When I was about 6, we had heavy armed robbery in my house. We were held at gunpoint.
Mm.
Mm.
And I think since then, nighttime, I just can't. I really, the smallest bang, the smallest noise, I go into a trigger state. Like I'm like, that fear, that terror just completely takes over. Another thing, like even when I'm working at the restaurant sometimes and the chef bangs a knife, that bang, instant trigger state. I can't
Oh.
breathe. My palm gets
Mm.
sweat. I kind of almost lose vision. I'm in a full blown fear trigger state. It's almost as if I'm back in the home, in the bedroom when they were breaking into the house.
Mm. Mhm.
And that's something I've carried my whole life.
Mm.
And I didn't even realize how big of a deal it was. I mean, I went to therapy for it. Like I said, when I was
Mhm.
16, I went back to therapy and I still, it's almost as if in my head, it hadn't registered that I have a problem
Mm.
that's affecting me. I could go for a drink. One time I was at the bar with my friend and somebody popped, when they pop a champagne, or I jumped out my
Yeah.
chair and she was just sitting there without a care in
Mhm.
the I jumped out my chair and so I had to take a minute to collect myself and sit down. And this was even at that time, it hadn't registered that I'm
Mm.
still carrying the PTSD from I had known it was there. I've been to therapy for it, but I still hadn't in my head. It had never registered. So very
Mm.
recently, I'm
Mm.
like, now it's registered. Now I've really done the work for it. They have this
Mhm.
technique they use in therapy called reliving. It's complete agony because you'll be shocked. This is why I used to tell the therapist, I am so shocked that I'm still having these reactions. I can recollect every single detail from that night. That's
Mm.
how stamped it
Wow.
is in my head, you
Mm.
know? And it's something like I'm saying, I've carried for 25 years.
Mm.
And I've been to help for it, been to get help for it on and off, but it still never really registered that, oh my God, like, oh my gosh,
Mm.
this is still
Yeah.
affecting me. And it's still, so it took that reliving. And even through that, you have to journal that thing so many times to get to a point where you don't have as a strong reaction, physical reaction. I'm
Mm.
not going to say now when it comes up, I've dealt with it so much better. So now when I hear a loud bang, I have ways to recollect and say, okay, I look at my tattoos. I look at my tattoos, I look at my hands, I'm like, I'm not 6 years old. This is grown me. This is not the
Mm.
same era.
Mhm.
I'm
Mm.
in this room. Collect yourself. And it's something I have to constantly do. But since I've gotten help for it, it doesn't affect me as much.
Mm.
So sometimes
Mm-hmm.
my whole point of all of this is to say sometimes you're still carrying it, or maybe it's been brought to your mind,
Mm.
like, yeah,
Yeah.
but it still hasn't registered for some reason. We're talking about it, but my brain hasn't computed that this is happening, it
Mm.
hasn't
Yeah.
deciphered the process. Everything is just still in shambles. So it takes time to
That.
deal with certain things as well, and you can carry it for
Yeah.
years. You think you've
Mm.
dealt with it, some new trigger happens, some new bang, I'm like, yay, what do I do now? you
Mm.
know
Yeah.
so it's an ongoing
Yeah.
process.
That's the subconscious mind, right? It's in your
Yeah,
subconscious mind there, and it's resting there. And it's like when there's a trigger, it's almost like a button that's been pushed. And
yeah,
also,
Yeah.
book that's become viral, I think it's called The Body Keeps Score, when it comes to trauma and things. So you think that you've
Yeah.
forgotten. No, it's somewhere in your subconscious mind, and your whole body reacts to triggers and
Yes.
things. So yeah, sorry that you had to go
your
through.
body your body remembers. That's the
Your
thing, your
yeah,
body
yeah,
remembers.
it remembers.
Yeah. And a lot of people think the mind is just the brain. Like the mind is, if you ask somebody to point to their mind, they're gonna point right.
Mm,
No, all of your body is your mind. It's all of it works together. Your nervous system, all of it. And yeah, the body remembers. So even though you may not be in that particular situation, your
mm,
body is remembering that situation and responding to it as if you were there. And it's kind of like it's like a programming, right? Like a computer. A computer is programmed to run a particular way or respond a particular way. Like our phones are very smart now, smartphones, and they're the more that we use them, we kind of train them into how fast we type or how our voice sounds. We train it to pick up on certain cues from us, and it's the same way. Like our body picks up on certain cues in our environment. So if something happened that was a strong enough event to create a core memory for us, the body is shaping itself, and the brain and the mind and your nervous system is all shaping itself so that you can function in, if something like that were to happen again, and two, just in case something even may look like what happened. It doesn't even have to be what happened. It could
It just
look
has
like
to
what
look
happened,
like it.
and the body is like, okay, yeah, no, we gotta, this was dangerous for us before, this is going to be dangerous for us again, so let me prepare you. Fight, flight, what is it? Fight, flight, fawn.
Fight or flight or freeze. There's fight, flight,
fight
freeze.
yeah fi- Fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So
Yeah.
base that's what the body is doing. It's like either you could fight, you're gonna run,
Body.
you're gonna be
The
paralyzed.
reason why I was bringing up the night terrors, when the incident happened, I was asleep in bed.
ah,
Mm,
Nighttime, asleep in bed. So even the
yeah.
slight move, I don't do sleepovers. Once in a while I do when I feel like, okay, I feel
Mm-hmm.
sick. But even the slightest movement at night, the slightest bang, I almost don't know. I don't even remember it happens to me. That's how smart
Yeah.
it just goes boom. And I'm like, unless someone is there to tell me this happened, I would never know.
mm,
Yeah.
wow.
So the fight is flight. I think we know what flight and fight and freeze
Yeah.
is, but the fawn is you become a people pleaser. You lack
Mm,
identity, you don't have boundaries, and you become codependent.
wow.
So it's those four different things. But something you talked about kind of leads into our what we're going to talk about now in terms of childhood, and how childhood development really affects who we are later in life, and how those are formative years, how they
Mm.
shape us, what happens during those years really leave an imprint on us
I'm gonna say
into
like
our adulthood.
brains when we're younger, they're more plastic and impressionable. So it's like when you
Yeah.
experience things at a very young age, it feels like it's the end of the world. It really feels like it's the end of the world. And it's like and you don't have the experience to deal with those things mentally. So sometimes it is, as a kid, you just store it, and if an adult doesn't bother to come and
Yeah.
explain, like, this is what happened and you shouldn't really maybe stress over this is not your fault, because there are some kids who just go into this thinking that it is my fault. It's my fault that this
Yeah.
happened. But no, that's just the brain of a child. They just really, they don't know
Yeah.
how to connect the dots sometimes. And it's like, as a child, I think it's important that parents also, if they notice that their kid has gone through a traumatic incident, take your child to therapy, talk to them,
Yeah.
explain to them, help them understand so that they don't actually put the blame on themselves. Because I was reading articles, especially like things like divorce and how divorce can actually be traumatic for kids. And most kids, you will not believe, actually blame themselves to say that I'm the reason why my
Mm.
up. I'm the reason that daddy doesn't come anymore here because I'm not, he doesn't like me and all these things. So unless if a parent
Mm-hmm.
down and talks to these, to the kid, to the child or the children, to say that this is how you're supposed to sort of take this situation, don't put it
Yeah.
upon, and things like that. And it's interesting also when we're talking about the neurological responses. Trauma even goes to as deep as food. Sometimes if you have
Mm.
had food and then you've had like a serious reaction to it, and then it's like you start to have food aversions and stuff like that, I think that should be under the umbrella of trauma. Because
Yeah.
as, yeah, as we're talking about neurons and the body, there is recent study,
Mm-hmm.
there's some neurons actually in our gut. So
Mm.
it's like they, yeah,
Mm.
it really, trauma is,
Interesting.
it's deep, it goes into so many different areas of life, and it's really how we deal with it though is very, very important.
I think based on what you just said, it's very important to highlight how important therapy is.
Mm,
Let me tell you, before I went back to therapy again, I had been through therapy so many times that I had never had an effective sort of experience from therapy. It hadn't really left an impression, it hadn't really done much. So when I went back to therapy this time, I was very skeptical. I wasn't sure what I was getting myself into. And I think a lot of people
Mm.
feel like, why am I going to talk? Like, I can understand myself. Like, what do I go
Mm-hmm.
talk? I go and talk about a traumatic experience. I know it happened. Now what? That was the
Yeah.
mindset. When I'm telling you, it took about 6, 7 sessions for me to finally be like, whoa, this is big. This helps. It you need to, even when you're
Mm-hmm.
therapy, sometimes you need to give it time to kind of work. You need it to give it time to kind of touch you in those places that you really need. And what I didn't realize was, like I said, I'm grown. I didn't realize I
Yeah.
still had that 6-year-old mindset from that experience. I'm grown where I am right now. I know I'm not 6. I know that's not gonna happen. And I was even harboring a lot of resentment towards the adults around me because they left me in the room on.
Mm.
So I was harboring a lot of resentment, and I still, and I could compute in my head, like, it wasn't their fault. It was a traumatic experience for everyone. So everybody was fighting everywhere. I
mm,
can put that in my head now. But for some reason, it still hadn't registered. And I think that's where
Mm.
plays that vital role. It helps you make that link. It's something you've been thinking of, and you think, oh, they went there and I'm not holding resentment, or they couldn't because it was traumatic. Everybody was scared.
Yeah.
Yes, you can see it, but let me tell you something, hasn't registered it. And it
No.
all seems like you're back to like the 6-year-old where it's like really trying to break things down. So therapy, people talk of therapy a lot, and there's some people that just don't think therapy works and things. Give it some time and go to therapy. Honestly, it
mm,
helps a lot, a lot, a lot. If there's anything you can take from this video, it's therapy is effective.
mm,
Yeah.
mm,
People think it's just talking about the experience. And yeah, you do talk about the experience, but therapists can also give you tools to help with those things when the memories come up, when you're triggered, the therapist can give you tools to deal with it. So it's more than just talking about it. And therapy and mental health has a big stigma in the Black community.
mm,
And it's not necessarily something, I think it's something that we're starting to realize is important, especially in the millennial generation and in the Gen Z generation. It's something that millennials and Gen Zs kind of get and are making steps to address. But older generations, before millennials, like mental what? Mental health? I don't know what's that. I don't have to deal with those things. But how do you deal with the triggers? Because the triggers aren't going to stop coming. triggers are gonna happen. How do you deal with those? What are some things that helps you to deal with the triggers when they come up?
And can I say another dangerous thing is when you have a background in psychology. I've done psychology since I was in my GCSE to university.
Mm,
Like, so I'm like, what is it that they're gonna give me that I don't already know? I already
mm,
know. Even triggers, funny enough, I know what triggers are. I know how to deal with triggers. I've read on it. It's one thing to read and the register part where it registers in your brain, actually do
yeah,
it. Another thing, sometimes you have all the answers, but the connection of the answers, you haven't put it together yet. And you'll be surprised how you've never thought of it in a certain way before, or it has never come up in that way before. And therapy helps you join the dots. So imagine
Mm,
you have dots, you just have to join them. And it
mm,
really helps.
yeah,
And
mm.
doesn't matter, even the therapists themselves need therapy sometimes. You just need that extra bit of help,
absolutely.
the lines.
Mm,
Yeah,
mm. I was gonna say some
yeah.
people live in countries where therapy is not so accessible, and it might be actually
Hmm.
expensive. Another thing that you can actually do is maybe get books. There's loads of books of how people went through experiences, how they dealt with them, or what therapists
Yeah,
actually, right? And obviously we are all different, and how we deal with these things, but then just try what and see what works with you. Reflect, and maybe the journaling thing as well, or maybe just speak to somebody who's wise, who can actually give you some advice. And yeah.
I really want to try that journaling because I used to journal a lot when I was younger, but now I haven't journaled in
Do you,
years. I think I need to get one. Yeah, I think I definitely need to get one. I'm going through a moment in my life, period, season, I don't know what to call it, but I'm going through a time in my life where I feel like there were a lot of things that I ignored because of wanting to keep the peace. Um, that affected me more than I realized it affected me. And I'm talking about in everything, in friendships, in romantic relationships, in home stuff. Yeah, and I just feel like I'm going through a moment where all of it is kind of like coming back. Talked about the memories. It wasn't even that the memories weren't there. I didn't even forget the experiences. Maybe
blocked
I
it?
just wasn't in the right, yeah, I wasn't in the right space to really emotionally process it. And so now I'm like, oh, so now it's like, yeah, you're gonna emotionally process these things,
And it's a
whether you want to or not.
lot the
Yeah.
ones as well. So I'm just gonna give you guys more details on the journaling. I have three. I have a prayer journal
Mhm.
just between me and God, and I have my well-being journal. Then I have a journal where I kind of just free write whatever comes into my mind, and I incorporate gratitude into that one as well, like gratitude journaling. So there's
Mhm.
different in journal, and like with what you've just spoken about, what you could do is whatever comes into mind. Sometimes you get the memories pop up. When it comes into
Mhm.
mind, at that point in time, if you can, write it down, write down the experience, write down what your thoughts are, write down what your feelings are towards those people, how they made you feel, what feelings you're harboring towards them. Then break it.
Mm.
When you've seen it all in sort of writing, you're like, okay, so now how can I do this? Okay, maybe I need to forgive myself. Maybe this area I really need to focus on forgiving this person. And another thing as well is
Mhm.
resentment towards people. I'm not saying you are. What you could
Mhm.
do, it all down and be like, from their side, how can I see it from their point of view? Okay, they were going through a lot as well. Okay, they didn't have the tools as well. Regardless of all of that, doesn't mean what they've done to you or however they've made you feel is okay. It's still not okay.
Mhm.
That acceptance of, okay, this is what they were going through and this is what they made me feel. However, it's still not okay, but I can still
Yeah.
move back that so that way as well you give yourself some love back, and what's the word? You bring your feelings to light, and you almost come
Mhm.
of like, yeah, because sometimes when people trigger you or do certain things to you, it's easy to say, okay, I'm gonna forgive them and da da da, and kind of just ignore yourself and betray yourself and not
Yeah.
address. But I'm still hurt, and what they did was still not okay. Although I understand where you're coming from, it was still not okay for me. So just properly
Mhm.
okay, for me, I can say you didn't know what you were doing, blah blah blah. But it was still painful.
Mhm.
I can still address that, and then you move on from it. It makes it easier to put your mind at ease and close that chapter.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
sometimes it also stems from a place of self betrayal, where you didn't feel like you sticked up for yourself.
So the power of imagination also helps in revisiting these situations. I think there was a celebrity saying things like, um, her dad was not, what is it called? She wasn't, the dad was not in her life, and the dad then passed away. And then the
Mhm.
therapist asked her to go back and imagine that she's with the dad, and then
Mm.
actually say out all her frustrations and all of her thoughts and feelings as if the dad is sitting right opposite her. And she said that was the most liberating experience. So sometimes it's like you feel like maybe some words are unsaid. Go back there in your
Yeah.
mind and words. Go back there and say them.
Mm.
And I think it does give you peace,
Mhm.
a degree of peace, if I can say. Yeah.
Yeah, or write a letter to them. Don't send
Mm.
it.
Yeah.
Huh?
I think I might.
Then I light it I light it up with a lighter, and I watch it burn, baby. And I'm like, burn it off, go away. Like,
That's actually a good idea.
it's a way of saying this is my outlet. I've written the letter to you, and I burn it, and I watch it burn, and I'm like, this all the pain that I was carrying from this is burning with this letter now. It's going away, or put it in the trash and bin it, and just it's like a symbol
Mm.
of saying I put it in the trash and I bin it.
Symbolic. Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
it's
done.
what
Yeah, I think I.
because human beings were big on sentiments, and that's a way of like saying, "Ugh, go to the bin, you belong.
Mhm.
I don't need this pain and sentiment. Go away."
Yeah, 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 yeah. I think one of the ways I deal with things that come up, one of the way I have been dealing with things that come up, like just talking to people that I can trust, confiding in people that I consider to be safe, who I know will create a space where they can hold my stories and hold my pain, and also who are wise enough to help me walk through it. Because I mean, because we talked a little bit about the talk therapy and how people think it's just talking, talking, talking. I don't want to just talk, talk, talk. There are moments where I do need to just get it off of my chest, but I really confide in people who would allow me to get things off of my chest, but also create a space where they can kind of talk me down off of a cliff, so to speak, right? And help me to make better decisions moving forward with whatever it is that I'm going through. Yeah, but that journaling, I want to do that. Letter writing, I think I'm gonna try that too.
So what you just said is basically talking to people who can pour back into you, pour back some
Yeah.
wisdom. And sometimes it's good because people can see it from a different point of view. Maybe you think,
Yes.
even sometimes you think, I'm so right, but someone can actually take a step back and be like, ask you certain questions, and you'd be like, whoa, okay, maybe I didn't think of it that way. Maybe I'm wrong, you know?
Yeah. Offer a different perspective too, because there are things that, like, we all interpret things through our own filters, our
Mm.
life experiences, our backgrounds, and our pain. All of these things, create filters where we see life through a certain way. So getting someone else's opinion, like, hey, this thing happened, and this really bothered me, and I just need your feedback. What do you think? How did you think it was me? How do you think I responded? Yeah. So getting people's feedback has been useful for me. Barbie talked a lot about like therapy and journaling, but what are some other things that you guys think helped you with the trauma that you experienced?
I think connect with your soul. And that sounds like such an out there thing. When you
Mm,
experience trauma and things, or when it also can lead you to a state of depression. And what comes with that is you're not in your body. Well, that's how it feels. It feels like
yeah.
you're just doing life, but
Mm-hmm.
you're there. So taking the time to connect. If it is crying that you need to do, sit down,
Mm,
feel the pain. Don't push it away. So there's therapy, there's journaling, and there's acceptance.
Mm.
There's
Yeah.
acceptance. Okay, my heart is broken. Accept, acknowledge that your heart is broken. And please cry if you need to. Just be crying and be crying. And
Yeah.
time, in a few weeks, you have cried your cried and you've moved on. So if it's crying that you need to give yourself that space to feel pain. That's what I can
Yeah.
say. Sometimes we push down pain and we spiral and we go down drains that were not meant, because it will lead you to, doing things out of character that you're like, really and truly, if I had just sat down and accepted, I would not have gone down that route and created even more
Yeah.
self.
Mm-hmm.
Look yourself in the mirror, cry it
Mm.
out. Just accept, do that soul work, connect with your soul,
Yeah.
Mm.
connect with yourself, sit down and connect. And whatever
Mm.
that comes, accept it, cry it out, scream, shout, but accept that pain and yeah, do that connection with yourself.
Mm. And also,
Yeah. Because we want people to hold space. I just want to say, we want people to hold space for our pain, but we also have to hold space for our own pain. So,
And I
mhm.
that's a painful process. Hey, I went through it too. I went through that one. It was not nice. You really have to sit with your pain and accept it. And if that means you're crying, then please cry, scream it, whatever it is, but feel it. And I think for many years,
yeah.
I pushed my pain to the side. I did everything else but deal with it. And when it
Mm.
finally to dealing with it, oh, please, you need to get to the place where you do that work.
Mm.
But that it works differently for everyone. Sometimes you need the suffering to push you to the place of addressing things. If
Mm.
you're good enough, sometimes you haven't hit the breaking point where you're like, okay, I need to sit down and do the work. But if you can
Mm-hmm.
take anything, is the earlier you do the work, the better.
Mm. Mm. I was gonna say,
Absolutely.
wouldn't it would be so powerful if we had modules trauma from primary school, because
Yeah.
I think trauma is part of the human experience. As long as you live on earth, you're going to experience some trauma in some shape, form, or capacity. And it's like the
Mm-hmm.
teach kids about these things, the better I feel, because kids know a lot more than we think. We say, oh, maybe that's too much of a heavy topic for them to understand. But then imagine how powerful
Mm-hmm.
if kids are actually taught about trauma, what it looks like, the signs of trauma, who to tell, where to signpost them. And yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's really good.
Yeah.
The thing with the UK is though, they have so many good things in place for
Mm.
these kind of. I can't take the blame for when I went to school in Ghana. I grew up in Ghana, so when I went to school in Ghana, definitely not. There was
Was
no such.
Yeah.
uh,
elaborate.
I think in the UK, there's definitely a lot of resources for that. You can even in school they have counselors like on site and things like that. And it's even getting to the place of realizing you need help. So therapy helps, journaling helps, getting to the place of acceptance helps. And I think Kit was also saying self-help books. Read a self-help book. Sometimes some people just don't like talking to people about things, or they don't even
Mm-hmm.
articulate what they want to tell you. Emotions can be very heavy to put in words. So that's a good way to let that out is journaling or pick up a self-help. These are all things that can help you deal with certain things.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
There's resources, there's counselors in school. Use your counselors in school. Use it. It's free. When you're older, you will be paying for therapy. So use it. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, and
help. Seek help.
yeah. And when I was in school, when I was in school, our 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 guidance counselor at the time wasn't really much help. But I do think that now they really, really are being a lot more intentional in picking guidance counselors who are trained. And I see like a lot of schools now are trying to introduce social emotional learning into their curriculum and trying to integrate it into their curriculum. Yeah. not necessarily the public schools, but a lot of private like primary schools and elementary schools here are integrating that into their curriculum, because I think if you talk to anyone in the Bahamas, they would say the Bahamas is like a traumatized culture.
Wow.
African culture is also very traumatized. Don't you think
Yeah.
so?
Yeah, it's a traumatized culture, and like they realize the importance of implementing that. It's so important, because you have young people in this city, and I live in Nassau in the Bahamas, right? So you have young people in Nassau who have witnessed their parents or their dad shot in front of them, have witnessed their mom being abused, and that's not a one-off situation. Like that's common. It happens. So you have like these kids are going through some really difficult things, and they need someone who's able to say, "Come, let me help you. Let me show you how to process the things that you're feeling," because they're not getting it in the home, so they have to get it from somewhere. And school is a good place for that to start. Like they grow up in hard. Like I have stories. Okay, these kids grow up in really, really difficult circumstances.
I have a last point to add as well. Whatever, sometimes it's very easy to judge people when they're going down a certain road and things.
Mm,
But I feel like one thing to always remember, if you've been through a lot of trauma and things, forgive yourself for the things you did when you were trying to survive.
mm,
Did it,
Yeah.
but you know why. You know why you were picking that drink and drinking yourself silly. You know why you needed the spliff. I'm not saying go and do it. Please, don't do it. But I'm saying, if it's an area where you feel like any form of, like, you feel regret, you feel bad, forgive yourself for the times when you were trying to survive. And I think it's very
Hmm.
to always talk about certain people's habits or things that they do, but it's like, if you lived one day in their shoe, you would just be navigating rough, left and right, everywhere, helter skelter. You'll
Yeah.
be deep confusion. So you do not know, you haven't walked a day in someone's shoes. So, forgive yourself for the things that you did. Don't carry that regret with you. You were trying to survive. And the people around you as well, they need to extend a lot of grace. Because sometimes I just look at the cross that some people are carrying. I'm like, hey, my back cannot carry that heavy load. You have to extend a lot of grace to people.
mm.
Yeah. And people like to say, if this was me, I would do this differently. Was it you?
It's not
It
you.
wasn't
It's not
you.
my
You
mistake.
don't know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That one is triggering for me because I'm like, what do you mean if it was me? It's not you. So now, go and drink your own juice. Yes. It's not your business.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. You mentioned self-help books. You mentioned self-help books, Barbara. What kind of books has helped you both in your journey? Like, what books have you read that you think has been, name one book, the one book you think has been very instrumental for you as you've navigated your own trauma?
I think for me, I've always known I'm big on spirituality. So having to take that seriously now, after I've done a lot of work on PTSD and things, I'm like, I don't want my trauma to be my identity. I don't want to think
Hmm.
that's who I am. No, I feel like I am so much more. So I had to seek a higher meaning for myself that resonates with me more than my trauma or more than the things I've been through or the things I've had to survive. I am so much more than that.
Hmm. Yeah.
Connecting spiritually, taking my spirituality seriously, because that's an area where I feel like that's where I am. That's who I am. I feel like, yeah, I don't know how to put that
Yeah.
in. But have you heard of Eckhart Tolle?
Hmm.
He writes the spiritual books. And basically, any book he's written, that's my book. I would say I started off with New Earth, and at the moment I'm on Stillness Speaks, and I've read in and out some of his other books. But yeah, I think those are the books that really help me ground myself. my spirit, because it helps me know that, there's always going to be noise outside, there's always going to be your trauma, there's always going to be your experiences, the things you've been through, but to the core, who am I? And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's what his books sort of do for me. It's not for everybody, but it's definitely my cup of tea.
Mhm.
Mm.
Yeah. So I watch a lot of YouTube videos. But I was going through my library in Audible, the app for books. I was trying to
Mm-hmm.
see if a book about trauma, and I did actually. It's called Trauma and Memory, and I think it offers a bunch of case studies. So we'll link it in the description box if it's worth me
Yeah.
putting down. But there's
Yeah.
another video as well that I watched about childhood trauma and how it affects the brain. It's quite a long video on YouTube, but then it's actually very interesting. So we'll also link it down in the description box.
Yeah. I think one book I'm reading now is called Mended: Thoughts on Fear, Love, and Leaps of Faith. And it's by Anna White, and she just talks about her own experiences with trauma. She doesn't use the word trauma, but the experiences that she went through has been very traumatic for her, and kind of how she navigates coming out of dark spaces. So that's been the book that I'm reading now, and it's kind of like sitting across on like at a table, drinking a cup of tea or coffee, and hearing a friend share about their own experiences and how they were able to come out of it. So that is what I'm reading right now. I think we could probably put all of the books, all of the resources that we've mentioned in the description bar for YouTube, for the podcast platforms. Yeah. So any last thoughts that you
Um,
want to share?
Yes, so if you because sometimes trauma can be very, 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 very traumatic. And if you
Mm,
have like suicide thoughts, please speak to someone. Please, 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 please speak to someone.
there is a helpline, actually. There's the Samaritans that you can call. There's other helplines, well, in the UK, I don't know about the Bahamas, that you can call. And that's something we can put in the description box as well.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
think
Definitely.
if you feel like you're in a place where it's really dark, it's very difficult to seek help. But if you can, get yourself to the place where you seek help, get help. You can call your GP.
Mm-hmm.
That
Okay,
I know
that's like
I mean just bad memories affecting you. Still, your GP can help. And yeah, you can also sign yourself up for free therapy with a organization called Health in Mind. So you can sign up with that as well. And I think it's also very important to remember that you go through things in life, you experience things in life. It could be sexual assault, it could be armed robbery, it could be whatever traumatic experience it is. You always have to remember that you are not your experiences and the things that you've been through. You are so much more than that. So remember that to your core, there's so much more than your trauma. And yeah, it's part of who you are, but it's not who you are. That's a very out there thing to say, but I hope it makes sense.
yeah, it does.
And prayer
It
as
does.
well. I know some people are like, it's toxic to always talk about prayer when it comes to traumatic things, but it helps. It's helped some people, and God has a way. God sees everything, I feel, and
Yes.
it's one of those things where He knows you better than you know yourself. So sometimes even how to deal with things, He can actually show you how to deal with things. So,
So that's another big thing. If you feel like it's always good to find like it's like a support box or like a comfort box of where you go and find all the things that you need when you're triggered. Could be music.
Yeah.
That's the last tip. Subscribe, follow, share.